There's a uniform that hangs in my bedroom closet. It's not mine, it's my dad's. He served in World War II as a member of the U.S. Air Force and helped fight the Nazis. On one collar, there's a silver bar, and that indicates his rank. He was a lieutenant in the Air Force. On the other collar are his wings, including a tiny brass propeller at the very center. On one sleeve is a blue patch that shows that he was a member of the mighty 8th Air Force. It was the 8th Air Force that did most of the bombing in Nazi Germany during the war. There's even a little dry cleaning tag with the date of 1944 in it that I keep there to remind myself that yes, my dad actually was in World War II and he did have some amazing experiences. When my dad went to war, he had been this close to finishing up his college degree at the University of Wisconsin. But he got the call saying, Uncle Sam needs you to fight the Nazis. So he had to put his education on hold. Then he went out and they had to train everybody who was going to fly on a bomber to do various jobs. So they would go to Texas to a gunnery school. They went to New Mexico for a navigation school. And they had to learn all these different skills so that if one member of the crew got killed, another person could jump right in and operate that machine gun or be the navigator and help the crew out. As you can imagine, this led them to become really close friends. They were going up there and literally their lives depended on each other doing the right job and doing it well. So they became very close. And they were truly a band of brothers. And then at one point, he was sent to, of all places, Mountain Home, Idaho, for part of his training. Well, my dad was from Wisconsin and hadn't traveled very much. So when he heard Mountain Home, Idaho, he thought, oh great, I'm going to see the Rocky Mountains. Wonderful. When he got there and he saw that Mountain Home was flat and full of sagebrush, he was kind of like, really? But the exciting thing that happened to him was that my mom took a train out to Boise. And in Boise, they were married in St. John's Cathedral on Hayes Street in the north end of Boise. Now, why am I telling you that? Because many years later, I was a TV director in California. And then I was offered a job to direct at KTVB in Boise. And when I met my wife-to-be, she lived 3 doors down on Hayes Street from that same cathedral. You know, when you think about it, life sometimes has a pretty good sense of humor. This is a B-24. This is one of the planes that he served in, although it's not his plane. The B-24 was one of the so-called heavies, heavy bombers. The more famous one was the B-17 Flying Fortress. But those two planes together were the ones that did almost all the bombing in Germany, because they were the only planes that could fly thousands of miles carrying tons and tons of bombs and then return all the way to England to their bases. Most planes didn't have enough power and couldn't hold enough gasoline to fly that long with that kind of payload. Flying in a B-24 was dangerous though, because the Germans were shooting flak guns at them. And on many of their missions, one or more of his crewmates would be either hurt or killed. And this was difficult on my dad. On one mission, his best friend on the crew, his pilot, Leo, who was also his best man at the wedding in Boise, was killed. And I know that was tough on Dad. Years later, he went to England, to the grave of Leo, and he wept. And so I know that was tough on him. Next slide. So by this time in the war, almost the whole crew was gone, except for my dad. So he became a floater, and he was assigned to other crews to work as bombardier for 1 or 2 missions, and then rotated around. So for his 20th mission, he was working with a bunch of guys that weren't really like brothers to him. He didn't know these guys at all. So that was weird for him. And their target was Hamburg. And Hamburg is the largest port city in Germany. So that's where all their naval vessels were produced. Their destroyers, their cruisers, their battleships, and that's where they were made. So obviously the Nazis knew this is going to get bombed a lot. So we're going to have to really, really protect it. And Hamburg was famous for these huge buildings that held 4 huge flak guns, one at each corner. And it had elevators in it. And people down at the bottom of the building would load these enormous shells on the elevator. They would ride to the top where they'd be loaded into the guns and shot at the bombers. These flak guns were so unusually large and powerful that they could shoot flak 4 miles into the air. 4 miles up. And of course they could dial that back down if the bombers were not 4 miles up. They could try to hit the elevation precisely. But once the bomb got up there, the flak bomb, it exploded and it became spinning shards of sharp steel. And those spinning shards of steel ripped through these light aluminum bombers like a can opener through a can of tuna fish. This was a very dangerous job. And, as it turns out, on this mission, Dad's plane was hit by flak. Now, again, this isn't his plane, but this shows how much damage flak can do to a plane. Aluminum is not as tough as steel, and you can tell. What it does to flesh and bones is much worse. It's horrific. At this point, they knew that there was one thing that was certain. There was no way they could fly all the way back from northern Germany to England to their air base and land safely with this injured airplane. So they had to decide what to do. And they decided to fly across the Baltic Sea to southern Sweden, because Sweden was one of the few countries in World War II that was a neutral country. It didn't side with the Nazis, it didn't side with the Allies. And so if they could get there, they would be protected from any persecution or being chased by the Nazis. They were able to crash land there. On crash landing, the co-pilot broke his back, and the next day he died. But all the rest of the guys on the crew survived. At this point, they were put into what you could call a prisoner of war camp, and they were going to be held there for the rest of the war. You see, for a country to be neutral in a war, there were rules. And it may seem odd that in a thing as barbaric and violent as a war that there are rules, but there actually are. So the rule was, if you wanted to maintain your status as a neutral country, anybody that came in from the war to your country now had to stay there, and it couldn't go back to fight the war again. So whether they were Nazis, Americans, or British, they had to be kept in Sweden. So they were put into what you might call a prisoner of war camp, but there was a big difference. It's not like what you've seen in movies and documentaries. There were no guard dogs, there was no barbed wire, no machine guns. It was an old hotel. And they were allowed on weekends to go into town to see American movies or to go to a dance. So it wasn't that bad. But meanwhile, my mom only knows that her new husband is missing in action. And she's wondering, is he dead? Is he crippled? Where is he? Felix.
Felix.
And then the Swedes allowed them to send a telegram home. And Dad's was just 3 words: "Am alive, Carl." Now, I can just imagine how elated and relieved my mom was to know that he was alive, but also how concerned she must have been for, okay, I know he's alive, but has he been injured? Is he paralyzed for life? Has he lost a limb? What's happened? And where is he at? Okay? And then they allowed the flyers to send back a picture of themselves. And because Sweden's a very cold country, Dad had gone into town and bought himself a nice sweater. And the sweater had some reindeer on it. And he went to mail it to my mom, but before any mail could go out, Sweden, again, had these rules they had to follow to maintain their neutrality. And one of the rules was, you can't allow any of the soldiers to communicate military information back to their home country. And they looked at this, and they said, hey, this has got Sweden written all over it. We're the only neutral country in World War II that has a lot of reindeer in it. So the censors took a pair of scissors, and they cut out my dad's body. And my mom receives this picture of this floating head and no body. And again, I think, what was she thought? If it were me, I would have thought, is he losing a limb? Is he paralyzed and in a body cast? You know, what is the deal? So I'm sure it was very puzzling for my mom. Thankfully, the war ended only about 6 months later. Hitler took his own life. He couldn't stand the idea of his 1,000-year Reich coming to an end after only 12 years. He couldn't stand the fact that he would be held responsible for war crimes such as the persecution of the Jews and how they were treated in concentration camps. My mom and dad had a wonderful reunion back in the States. But this is more than just a war story, because this is my dad. And he was a great dad. And he went on to raise, along with my mom, 5 sons. And with all of us, he really emphasized the importance of being honest, of showing integrity in your dealings with other people, in caring about other people, in hard work and saving for your future, as well as some fun things. My dad took each of his 5 sons out and taught us how to do duck hunting, so that was something that I'll never forget. Freezing in a duck marsh in December with my dad. And it may sound like it wasn't very much fun, but it really was. And I have some memories out there in the marsh with him that are very, very strong. And so when I think about my dad, I think about the war story, but I also think about what a great guy he was. And I think, as I've gone through life, and I've had problems and trials and tribulations, as all of us do, I think, if my dad could make it through that experience of being shot at constantly, while he's 20,000 feet above land, not knowing if the next shell will explode his plane, instantly killing him, or if he might have to parachute out of a damaged plane, or be caught in a German concentration camp, or whatever. If he could come out of that and be a decent, honest person who cared about other people, and who loved his wife and loved his kids, then how can I have anything to complain about in my life? I really can't. Nobody's ever tried to kill me. I've never had those sort of challenges. And so when I think about him, it gives me courage. It gives me hope. It makes me realize that there are people with challenges far greater than mine. So for me, it's not only an exciting war story, but it reminds me of what a great guy my dad is. And every time I look in the closet and I see that uniform, next slide, and I see that uniform, I think of my dad. I think of the person he was, and I realize he wasn't just my dad, he was my hero. Thanks for listening.